if leaders of schools could become very consciously agents of other people's growth, then that would make a major difference to the way schools are run. I think it needs to be underlined and written in capitals. Do you know your student? Do you know who your student is? Do you know the aspirations, the skills, the talents of the child? And that is, for every teacher, the hallmark of a good teacher.
So today we're joined in conversation by Kavita Anand, who is the founder director of both Adhyayan Quality Education Services and Adhyayan Foundation. She was awarded the Ashoka Fellowship in 2015 for her social entrepreneurship and single-minded focus on bringing quality education to schools through leadership development. Over her career spanning 30 years, she has worked in organizations such as Aga Khan Foundation and the Sir Ratan Tata Trust. Thank you so much for joining us, Ms. Kavita. It's a pleasure to have you today. To begin with the conversation, so how is it that Adhyayan is working towards improving the quality of leadership and learning in schools, and how is it that your research expertise fits into this domain of your work?
Right. So I think you probably know that I set up a school myself for a group of, it was a society that wanted to set up a school, a private society, so it's a private school. And when I was setting it up, it was really organic. So it was set up first as a pre-primary, to which a primary got added, and then a middle school, and then a high school. So it was a great, fabulous time to be able to learn, understand, think about what is age appropriate and how to create a school that was really, not going to fall into the same traps that all schools fall into. And I think that preparation of becoming a school leader of a full school, you began as a school leader of a pre-primary and then kind of ended up with a 10th. It was a great journey. So that is what actually prepares you to be able to understand practitioner-wise what people go through when it comes to dealing with children, with parents, with teachers, with the management, the support staff, every kind of stakeholder that you have to deal with, apart from, of course, vendors and people who come and try and sell you the best options. But also it gives you a sense of, the administration required to run such a big, complex organization, the management, the leadership, the instructional leadership, the whole, leadership of teaching and learning, which is a science in itself and really complicated. So doing that laid a very solid base for me to understand what it is that school leaders deal with on a regular, ongoing basis. And that, because I come from a space where, for me, it's not about setting up a single institution, but about saying, how can anything that I do leverage a larger change? So that's where the idea of Adhyayan actually came in, that I work with other school leaders who are struggling with the same issues of being this person who's trying to deal with a very complex space alone. And that isn't fun. So it was about saying, okay, how do we kind of create networks? And if we work with a network, how does the network leverage each other's strengths and capabilities, so that the leadership and governance space, that's the space that I work with, really becomes facilitative or an enabler. I truly believe there are two kinds of people in this world. One is the person who enables people's growth, development, learning, etc. And then there are people who actually block other people's growth, development, and education. So I strongly felt that if leaders of schools could become very consciously agents of other people's growth, then that would make a major difference to the way schools are run. And that's how I set up Adhyayan, to work with school leaders. Not on, we don't sort of sell anything to school leaders. We work with them to strengthen their institutions, to strengthen the leadership, the middle leadership, the governance of the institutions, so that they can actually impact on the children and their learning and growth and development. There's a lot of research, honestly, that has been done in this space. And I'll just mention a couple of people. One is Michael Fullan, and the other is Vivian Robinson. Both of them have looked at leadership impact on students' learning. And it's a fairly significant, I think you probably, all of you, whoever's listening to me will remember that the principal played a major role in the way the school felt that day. In the assembly, if the principal had a smile on her face or his face, then the school felt like a cheerful place. And then, if the principal had a frown, you were really worried because you didn't know what had happened. So there is in every institution a single person who can set a culture of an institution, change it entirely to becoming facilitative for everybody. And that requires a certain set of skills. And those skills are what we work with leaders on strengthening in themselves.
Yeah. Wonderful. And like you talked about your personal experience in setting up an institution and having worked with these insiders, if I would call them, or the stakeholders for any school that is there. So how is it that you're transforming the way audits happen in the schools by giving the power to the insiders or these stakeholders rather than letting it out for the others to handle?
Yeah, so what happens when somebody comes from outside and gives you a report on your institution, where it goes either into the dustbin or into a drawer which nobody ever opens. So I think that's the point, that if you want to really make your school a stronger space, it can't be something that only you want to drive, because then everybody's agendas come into play, right? The children just want, the teachers to give them whatever notes because they know they have to learn it and then they have to put it into the exam paper and get their marks. And the parents just want to get a child who listens to them and will not argue and who just does very well, whatever the circumstances. And then everybody has their own understanding of what do they want from a school. So until and unless you bring everybody on the table and say, okay, look, this is what a good school does. These are the kind of practices that happen on a daily, everyday basis. Now, what we have to understand is, are they happening the way they should? Do they have the kind of impact on children that the way they should? So are children gaining because of our practices or not? If that is something that everybody feels, everybody studies. So say infrastructure of a school. I've given this example a couple of times because I found it most amusing when a principal said that my bathrooms have been beautifully put in place. I've got fantastic infrastructure, and the child said, but we don't use those bathrooms because they're too dark for us. And that was not something that he even noticed, because he never used the bathroom himself, that particular bathroom, or never noticed it because maybe he went in at a time when there was more light, but there was a lot of the time in the year when the bathroom was not lit well. So a simple thing like that, only a child who's using that space will be able to tell you that, so the playground has got too many stones, or can you help us to do something about the fact that our fan, it doesn't work in the class, and so everybody wants to sit under the fan which works, nobody wants to sit under the fan that doesn't. So there's a fight in the class because of that. Simple things which you don't notice because you don't have a system for it, then become clear. And that whole experience of listening to each stakeholder, because the stakeholders are part of the team doing the review. So if a student is asking another student that, tell me what you think is going well in our school and what are the gaps, the chances that you will get truth back are very high. But if a teacher goes and asks the children, they'll be scared. They'll say, this is a trick question. I know we're going to get punished if we say something is not okay. And they will not tell the truth. So if you're honestly interested in getting your school better, you must get a multi-stakeholder team in, and that's how we help you make that happen and provide the process by which everybody then looks at the same things, comes back, shares their experience and understanding, and then the school says, okay, this is working. Everybody's happy with this. And it is having an impact, not just happy. So everybody is happy in this country. People are most happy, which is amazingly good. But that it's really leading to children learning. And learning, not just rote learning, but learning so that they can explain what they have learned and they can show that they have demonstrate their understanding. So if that has happened, that your school is doing well. And if it hasn't, then you work with your stakeholders. As a school leader, you work with them to say, okay, how do we put something in place that will make a difference? So what will make the improvement possible? That's why. So it's, I think, pretty revolutionary for a lot of schools. They think children are, not necessarily somebody you bring onto the same table as a teacher and a parent and a principal to listen to. But some schools embrace it with full open hearts, and it's beautiful to see that process. And we love what happens because of that. Yeah.
Indeed. And I think there comes in this thought process of, I would say, a product design, where you design it for the user and, keep them at the center of it, rather than just making something and just offering it to them and then be like, oh, explore it as you want.
Yeah.
And that fits into the contextuality of India as well. And talking about India's contextuality. So as a country, it's really diverse and rich into, all these perspectives and themes and types of people that are there. So how do you intend to bring in the international approaches to this, diverse and a geography as India? And how has the approach proved to be so far?
So, when we talk about international best practice, what we have done is we've looked at inspection across the world. We've looked at what does Ofsted do in England, what happens in Dubai, what happens in Vietnam, why is Vietnam doing so well, what happened in the US, how are the private organizations that do school accreditation, how do they function? And then we saw that there were some things that were common across all of them. So across the world, there is an absolute agreement on certain things that say that this defines a good school. So if they are true of the rest of the world, they have to be true of the country, right? Because India is in the world. And if we were to look at what those practices could be, it's straightforward things. Like, for example, the principal of a school must know what's happening inside a classroom. So that means that if you were to ask any country inspector that what tells you that a principal really understands their school, they'll tell you it's because the person gets out of his office and goes to the classrooms and sits in the classrooms and sees what's going on. So a fair amount of principals here have told us that we do walk the corridors. And that is mostly because they want to make sure that everybody is in class and listening to the teacher, and that the teacher is in class and talking to the children. But they don't really know whether the people sitting at the back are listening to the teacher at all, whether the teacher, whatever they're saying, has caught the children's attention and children are asking questions, or is it only the teacher asking questions? Those finer details are not picked up from the corridors. You have to walk into a class. To walk into a class requires a culture in the school where the teachers feel comfortable to have the principal walking in and out of a class, right? It's not a simple thing because a lot of teachers are not used to it, so they are afraid. So, I'm using this example because it's a simple way to tell you that this is internationally agreed best practice. How do we bring it into the country if there is a very strong hierarchy and a lot of fear? So if the principal is seen as a fearful person, everybody's afraid of him or her, then what do you do to shift that? And that's the kind of work that we are doing, that we are saying that, how do you begin is by actually letting teachers invite you in, by saying in the staff room that I want to see some of your practice. How many of you want to just call me in for a lesson that you think is going to go really interestingly? Start with that. Maybe take a class yourself. Invite teachers into your class and say, you come and see, I'm taking class, and see how it goes. So small things that can be done that will change the culture and enable you to have the freedom to walk into every class and to see what's happening to the backbenchers, to see what's happening to the ones on the side, the ones sitting near the window. How much is the teacher able to get the attention of everybody? So this best practice is done. And the reason why we insist on it as something that is to be brought in to every country, forget just India, every country has to have it, is because can you imagine any factory where the floor worker doesn't have a supervisor? It won't happen. So, you have to know that all the training that you've given your teachers, everything that they have learned, are they practicing it? Are they using it in the class? Is that helping the children to learn? And if it's not, and you find other teachers in your school who are doing a good job, then how do you pair them together? How do you get them to learn from each other? So these are all things that are being brought in as international best practice. And I think we are able to do that well in a lot of the schools that we work with. So that's exciting to see it shift. Yeah.
And I would say that the current times had kind of given a breakthrough to this concept of the principals knowing what's going on in the classes, because a lot of classes that are happening online. Now the principal can just, enter the classroom without anyone knowing, with a username that no one knows that is the principal. So they
Yeah.
can
Yeah, absolutely. But you'd be amazed at how few people were actually using that. So, a lot of our training has been about how do you use this online platform and keep it going, please. Keep the work becoming blended rather than going back to the whole, lecture methodology. Believe me, children are pretty bored with lectures. I think you and I get bored with lectures. Why would children not get bored with lectures?
True. And talking again about this unprecedented changes that COVID has brought in. So how would you say the environment is changing in context of the current pandemic, be it the national education policy, which has brought in a whole of new changes to the system from the very basics of it? And is the whole experiment something that was needed, required, and will, I would say, flourish? Or do you think it'll just wash away with another thing coming up in the next year or something?
Well, I mean, depends on what that is. I think what everybody is now talking about is resilient schools, schools that can continue to work whatever happens, right? So today it's a pandemic which is health related. Tomorrow it could be climate related, something that happens, and another day it could be economy related. The issue is like if you are really an educator, do you first of all think that children being engaged in learning is important? And if that is your dharma, then you will or never see it as a nice to have. Like whenever we want, we can shut the school. Whenever we need, we can open it. That's not a dharma of an educator. So I feel strongly that we must keep this in mind, that with the fast changes that are happening in the world, there are also going to be crises. How do you stay related to your students is going to be fundamentally important, and keeping that as a very key part of the way you move forward, and whatever systems you create, whatever technology you adopt, the idea has to be that children can't be sort of suddenly abandoned and told, okay, manage. That's not on. If we've taken on the task and the responsibility of being the adults who are connected with the generation that is being in a sense kind of put through school as a formative phase, then that is a fundamentally important thing and we cannot disconnect. So I think that it should stay. Like, I don't know, people have a great way of forgetting anything that happens. So unfortunately, it should not get into a space where we say, okay, now we are back to face. All of the, learning that we've done online, etc., can all go away. I hope people are able to retain what they have learned.
True. And that's where my point actually lies. So would it just continue, or would people want to continue it beyond the pandemic or not?
I think a lot of very wise school leaders that I have met are very clear that it has to continue and that they will find a way of making it continue. Also, children have really enjoyed learning like this when they have got teachers who've understood the medium, because the medium is different. The classroom which is online is very different from a classroom which is face-to-face in real physical terms. And the kind of thing that you can do where children can do some reading and then come and have really good discussions online, where you can use breakout rooms, where you can have children do work in pairs and trees and then come back and talk about what they've discussed is so easy. So it just makes life so much more interesting when you can have polls and formative assessments and all kinds of things happening, which give you a very quick idea of how much have the children understood, what have they understood, are they going completely on the wrong track, are they kind of on track. So all of this is valuable, and I hope people never let go of this.
True. And the thing with this whole, I would say, online education is that now the teacher has more control over what is happening and every, I would say, nuanced aspect of it, where, like you mentioned, that the breakout session can be there. Every student's individual performance can be measured actually right now. Before, in a class, in a physical setup, you can't do that. And that brings me to the next question, where you, having worked with a lot of these organizations nationally, internationally as well. So what do you think is still missing in the whole system? Whereas even if we have gone online or we have brought in new technology, new kind of teachers, these support or training sessions, capacity building is happening. So, but still, is there something that you feel is deeply missing, be it in terms of, say, interest of students or attention spans, content, or even processes that can be changed?
So I think what very often is missed in schools is an element of fun. Yeah, I mean, and I'm really, I feel adults tend to take themselves very seriously, and so they kind of everything is very very serious in schools. It's very adult. Whereas your 99% of your population in a school is children, right? So, and I think children luckily know how to have fun. Even when you have a very strict teacher, people are passing chits and talking to each other, right? So I think that schools need to recognize that life is not about just like deadly serious work. It is about having a human contact with each other, about being able to form relationships which are long-lasting relationships. I think the Harvard study is a very good way of sort of pointing in the right direction, saying that people who are the most successful in terms of being happy are people who have been able to have very good relationships in their life, right? So recognizing that actually what helps you is not learning the subject matter alone, but having the time and the ability to talk with each other, to be respectful, to learn to listen, to learn to actually work in a way that says, okay, let's build on each other's knowledge rather than competing against each other and saying, I will keep my information to myself. That needs to come in, and it needs to be done in a culture of fun, joy, enjoyment. I mean, what's the point of being human if you can't laugh and really have a good time while you're doing what you're doing, right? So I think that's what's missing, and I think it needs to come in a big way. Also, the idea that every child is entitled to a good education. You can't have 5 people being celebrated as the toppers and the rest of the people feeling that they never made the grade. It's not true. It's not true. Every human being is valuable, and everybody has a perspective, and everybody's perspective is really interesting. So I think for teachers, for school leaders to recognize that, what is it that finally makes a child feel, okay, I can be able to do what I want to in this world, is if they feel valued, right? If they feel heard. So if we are able to do that for every child, where the attention of a teacher is not only on the toppers or on the people who don't succeed at all, if it's on every child and they learn how to make that possible, and it is, and with technology it's even easier, I think that's what's fundamentally important.
Indeed, and that again brings me to the point that you mentioned before, where you talked about creating the product around the students. I mean, building spaces around students. And if you keep the students in the center of it, I'm sure that all these, classes or subjects or even the learning outcomes that will happen out of it would just add to the personality of the student in the future life. Because right now, what's happening is...
Sorry, this is so important that, I think it needs to be underlined and written in capitals. Do you know your student? Do you know who your student is? Do you know the aspirations, the skills, the talents of the child? And that is, for every teacher, the hallmark of a good teacher. I remember in my school, my principal, he used to stand in the middle of the corridor and we would walk to our classrooms, passing him, and every morning he would say good morning to us with our names. He would call us by our names, and he knew the name of every child, 1,000 children that he knew the names of. That kind of attention and interest in every child is remarkable, and that's why I think a good teacher really knows her children.
True, and this just adds to their own, idea of a personality and, something that they would envision in the future for them to be or look up to. And that is what I would say that is purely missing out a lot of students that are coming out of the school system currently, that there's no personality per se. It's just the knowledge or some, study that they've done, but nothing as a person they can,
Which they don't even find useful. I mean, they forget. If you ask people how much do you remember, they don't. And the joke is, people will say to you that we'll mug it up just to forget it. I mean, the whole point is to use it for the exam because it's important, and then we don't. So it doesn't relate. I mean, how many times I've walked into a chemistry lab and said, okay, why are you doing this experiment? And the child says, because it's in the syllabus.
True.
And I ask them, okay, so why is it in the syllabus? What are you supposed to learn from this? Where is it used? What industry? What kind of, where is it? No, ma'am, don't know. And they haven't asked the teacher. The teacher hasn't asked the children. Nobody knows why they're doing what they're doing. That is scary. So I think that is, something about the curriculum we have to do something about. And I'm so glad the NEP is now addressing a lot of these issues and saying, why should children learn something that they don't get and understand, which doesn't relate to them, and right. How do you make everything relate to you? And really it can, because after all, it was discovered because it relates to human beings. It's not something that you're doing just for fun. How do we create schools that are meaningful is going to be the future. Because if you can't keep a child's interest and engagement, they're going to find something else to do or go somewhere else to do something. So schools are going to fundamentally change the structures that they have right now. I don't think in the next 10 years, the school is going to look like what it looks like or operate like how it operates. It is going to change drastically. And are we ready for the change? And are we going to lead the change? That's the question.
Indeed. And I think you summed everything up really wonderfully. So just for a concluding remark of sorts, so if you can just share anything that you're working on under Adhyayan Foundation, or any suggestions that you would have, apart from everything that you've already mentioned, that could add up to any educational institute or any educational, I would say, initiative to learn from.
Sure. So, for us, the thing is to, now that the national education policy is out and being adopted by the states, and I think it's very nice that to see MHRD is fully behind it and making the implementation happen. For us, that's why governance is the most exciting space to be right now, because the implementation of a policy, the successful implementation of a policy is governance. Yeah. And, it depends entirely on whether the states that we are working with, they may move faster or slower, depending on the kind of human resources that they have and the ability that they have to be able to move things. In a state government, I think we have seen complete willingness, real openness, a much more openness to NGOs coming and working with them. And I think that's great, because this is a space of citizens working with governance to say, how do we maximally use this opportunity of the NEP 2020? It would be an absolutely pathetic situation if in 10 years' time, we have an NEP 2030, but nothing has changed. That would not make sense. So being able to identify what needs to be put in place and working with the idea of complex, which is that, from a 3-year-old to an 18-year-old, what is the journey of a child is being looked at. A group of schools is being seen in that sense as a complex. So you're looking at pre-primary to higher secondary, being administered by one person who is the complex leader. And what we want to do is work with the states on the kind of support that a complex leader needs to be able to look at such a wide gamut of child development. Yeah. Be able to look at how collaboration can happen in the schools, which are feeder schools to the higher secondary, and how to ensure quality in all of those schools. So how to actually support the complex leader will be supporting the other leaders and ensuring that quality takes place and quality assuring the schools. So we will be working with them, and we feel that is the sort of the key to, if we have very good school complex leaders, that is the key to success in NEP 2020. And we would be very open to partnerships on this.
And I'm sure a lot of people would love to partner with you after the whole conversation and the insights that we already shared throughout. And that brings us to the close of conversation. Thank you so much for joining us, Ms. Kavita. It's been a pleasure to have you today with us.
Thank you, Deepak. It's been great talking.
Thank you.